Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the first in the 2026 series of Life, Justice, and Peace webinars. I'm Jean Welch Hill. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington State Catholic Conference. With me today is Tracy Yackley, the Operations Manager for the WSCC. And now for our guest speaker. If you've not read Father Aaron's book, The Church's Mission in a Polarized World, I highly recommend it, and I hope that today's webinar will inspire you to do that. Father is the Vicar General and Director of Formation for the Glenmary Home Missioners. He has a PhD from the Catholic University of Louvain in Systemic Theology and is a guest lecturer at St. Meinrad Seminary and School of Theology. He also serves on the editorial board for Review for Religious and the advisory board for the Conference of Major Superiors of Men Religious. He gives lectures and publishes regularly on the theme of Christianity and polarization. And he was just telling us that he's been invited to give one of those lectures in Hungary. So Father is getting the recognition he needs in order to make it clear that there are better ways to engage in the political world than through polarization. And so we're very grateful to have you today, Father Aaron, and please take it away.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Jean. I really appreciate the invitation, and I was really honored to hear that there was just a very large group of people who were registered for this event. So that really means a lot to me, and I thank you all in advance. And I do ask, do you receive my apologies? I've been coming off this sort of like 12-day cold that I received when I was had a chance to go back home and visit family in Minnesota around the Christmas time. And so pick that up. So my throat's still a little scratchy, and I'm using cough drops here and plenty of water. So I hope it's not too much of a distraction. Again, I apologize for that. So even though I've got a little bit of sickness going on and kind of recovering from that, I nevertheless am very excited to be here with you. I maybe I'm a strange person in that I get excited to discuss and think about and to work with people around the theme of polarization. And I get excited when people are willing to be courageous and take the opportunity to kind of dive deeply into this theme, which I understand and want to recognize at the outset is oftentimes a theme that brings with it a lot of kind of deep and intense emotions for us. I mean, it does that for me. If I've experienced and learned anything over the last number of years working with people in this topic, that oftentimes people come with a lot of emotions as they enter into sort of these environments. So I just want to recognize that at the outset and thank you for your courage and thank you for your interest. And though we have just a short amount of time together, I hope that what I provide is a little helpful tidbits, sharing a little bit of my story and some tools I think that can be helpful for you when you're thinking about this theme. And perhaps I can kind of point you in the different directions that might kind of serve to sort of look at this more in your own life and then really start applying some of the tools, the dispositions, the virtues that I will be talking about in this presentation. Just a real quick word at the very outset. So I'm a member of the Glenmary Home Missioners, and we are a community of priests, brothers, and lay people who really have a specific charism where we go to rural parts of the United States in where there's whole counties where the Catholic population is less than 0.5%. And typically there is no established Catholic presence. Almost in many cases, there's no parish at all. And so the people in these counties are living in some of the most underserved areas of the United States, oftentimes neglected areas, and oftentimes the church's gifts have not been presented to them in the fullest extent. And so our whole mission is to go to these places to bring the life-giving faith of Catholicism to people. And really for the last 85 years, we've been doing that mostly in Appalachia in the Southeast. And in 85 years, we started about 150 parishes, and which is something that I'm very proud of, which I think has helped inspire me in thinking about this theme of polarization as well. So just a couple words about Glenmary, and I'd be remiss if I didn't just say a few things. So to give you a little sense of where we're going to go together, just a little bit of an outline. Basically, the four main parts. I'm going to begin with a prayer. This is a prayer I've been using in many different contexts. And so I was asked early on, Father, can you help us think about a spirituality that might kind of capture how to understand and how to respond in this particular moment? And so in over months, actually, in presenting and thinking about that spirituality, I put together a little bit of a prayer that I'll share with us to kind of begin together today. Then I want to share just three short stories or little vignettes. And I think the stories are good because narratives, I think, help capture, what's going on. And I think they help capture what I have seen. And they give you a little bit of a sense of where I come from. And then I'll be providing three tools for you all. And again, this is just three of kind of many things that we could maybe be utilizing in this moment. But nevertheless, there are three very important things that I have found in my research and working with others and in my own life that work very well in the present kind of polarized moment we're living in. And then there will be time at the end for some dialogue, some questions, so that I can hear from you and you can push the conversation in directions where you have an interest. So turning then to this prayer, because we're muted, I will pray this kind of on my own. But if you'd like to, from your location, if you'd like to say the part that is bolded and underlined, I think that would be wonderful. And this is kind of really a prayer for unity, a prayer that I think captures what might be a spirituality for this present moment. And I know it's one that's been very, very meaningful to me. So we pause and just take a moment of quiet. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, in your life, you crossed over to the outcast. Help us to be one. In your teaching, you commanded us to love our enemy. Help us to be one. Before your supper, you washed the feet of those who would deny you. Help us to be one. Before your sacrifice, you prayed for unity. Help us to be one. On the cross, you brought together what had been lost. Help us to be one. In your death, you touched those in darkness. Help us to be one. After your resurrection, you returned to those who had abandoned you. Help us to be one. In pouring out your Spirit, you made the church the sacrament of unity. Help us to be one. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So moving now from that setting of a kind of spirituality, I hope in praying that prayer, we begin to see some of the images of our tradition, images of the gospel, images of our Savior himself, that present to us how we might begin to think about what is going on in this present age and how we might be called as missionary disciples in trying to mold our lives to look like that of Jesus's, how we might respond in these times. Now I want to just transition and just share really three stories, three vignettes with you. I think that'll provide some background information on kind of who I am and what I've seen really over the last about 7 years. So my time in this theme of polarization is actually really kind of goes all the way back to 2018. I was sent by my community, was very blessed to have a chance to go to Belgium, as was mentioned in the introduction, to the Catholic University of Leuven to study systematic theology. And I did that from 2014 to 2018. And really to make what is a really long and really wonderful story, very wonderful time of my life short, I came back to the United States in 2018. And I had really, before then, a kind of reprieve, a rest, a distraction, if you will, from what was going on in the US, because I was in Belgium, I was studying, I was taking in European culture, architecture, art, history. I was living in a whole other cultural context than the United States. And really for 4 years of my life, I simply just immersed myself in that. And then I came back in 18, and it was really within just a few weeks, maybe months, where I began to notice that really something at least felt like it had changed in the United States. And the thing that I was feeling is I felt like the intensification of what we might call toxic polarization and its effects on the situations and the lives and the people around me. And I could share many examples of this, but I began hearing from friends of mine who were priests. They were, trying to shepherd, large communities, and they would say things that I'd never heard before, such as, yeah, I had like a whole group of people left my church because they said they didn't no longer could sit in the same pew, with somebody who voted for X. And they said, I've heard from other friends of mine, ministers as well. They're saying, I'm just feeling overwhelmed. I'm stressed. It just seems like every single day there's like a new division emerging within my community. And some of it's a kind of a cultural, there's cultural influences for that. Some of it's because of the political partisan situation. Some of it's because of what was going on in the church. So I was hearing these stories, and I also began to see things happening maybe in my extended family. This was primarily, looking at what people were sharing on social media and group chats. And all of a sudden people were just saying things and doing things online, sometimes related to partisan politics, but related to other issues too, that they would never do in person or never say in person. And I was really just kind of shocked and wondering, like, what is going on? What has happened? I saw this a little bit in the community that I belong to, in a sense that part of that was that almost all of the conversations we were having were sort of revolving around the sort of partisan political reality in the United States, kind of in an exaggerated way. And I began to think, well, maybe I'm different. Maybe I won't be affected by this. But the crazy thing for me was I started to see the effects of this toxic polarization in my own life. And I really began to see that I was being affected by polarized culture. So something had changed and I was changing. And I wanted to really understand, like, what was going on? What was going on in our broader culture? Why was I being affected by this culture? Why was I being impeded from really being the priest that I know that God wanted me to be, and really sometimes being the family member, the disciple? And so that's really what got me investigating this topic. And it was more a kind of a self journey, kind of trying to figure out who I was and what was happening to me, even as much as it was perhaps, thinking about other people. So I began trying to say, what is happening inside of me? So a lot took place from 2018, but 2023, I published the book, The Church's Mission in the Polarized World, in the beginning part of that year. And leading up to that, and then following the publication of that book, I had been given so many invitations to give retreats and talks and to go to dioceses, religious communities, to talk to secular groups, to talk to Protestant groups, to just really go all around the United States. And much of that was really exhausting and tiring in many ways. It's also very rewarding. But in the moments where I kind of felt overwhelmed and maybe thought, well, this is just a sliver of my ministry as a Glenmary, and it's not the main focus, and maybe I can't keep going. I'm getting tired. I don't know if I can keep doing this. The thing that which really continued to motivate me and still does to this day is that I realize and have seen so many times that this issue really affects people's lives in deep ways. People are experiencing great sadnesses, and I'd say even tragedies within their families. I mean, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 20 times. And people will come up to me after a talk and they'll say, Father Aaron, like I never talk to my son or my daughter anymore because we had a falling out because of a particular divisive issue within our society. And people tell me stories. Well, I never go to my parish anymore. And this is a place that was my home for most of my life, because the priest there said something that upset me. And so I began to realize and I continue to realize over and over that this issue really touches people in a deep and a profound way. And oftentimes there are great sadnesses, but I also heard from people that the things that were presented were giving folks reasons to be hopeful. It was giving folks reasons to sort of try to find a way out of some of the challenges they're experiencing and really repair relationships, the most fundamental and important relationships with that they have in their lives, particularly with family members, particularly with their parishes, particularly with great friends, people they've been friends with a really long time and somehow kind of lost their way in that friendship. And so that's been a great motivating factor for me to kind of remain in this ministry, even though at times perhaps I've felt sort of tired, exhausted, or maybe disillusioned at times. The last little vignette or story I'd like to just begin with a little bit of a kind of foray into my background. So in 2025, just this last November, I was blessed and honored to be part of a conference at St. Meinrad Seminary and School of Theology. And this was a conference that took about 3 years of planning that I was part of with another organizing group, particularly with the folks from St. Meinrad, which is just a Catholic seminary in Indiana, but as well as with people from Focolare and then other backgrounds as well. We worked for 3 years, actually, to plan this actually just about 3 years to plan this conference. And it was wonderful, called Deepening Communion in a Polarized World. And we brought in bishops and theologians and church leaders, and there were seminarians present there. There were family members. There were leaders in the church. There were kind of just your normal everyday Catholic. There were around 200 people that came to a conference on polarization, and I was floored by this. I thought, I never thought that this would actually happen and come off this way. And the thing which I found about this conference is, we talked about some of the most important issues in the church. We talked about the divisions that are existing around the liturgy. We talked about, episcopal leadership. We talked about, Vatican II and implementing Vatican II. We talked about Catholic media. So some really hot button issues, and they could have been sources, for a lot more deepening of say toxicity and division. But what I found and what I'm so hopeful about is that really the conference was, it was a site of unity. It was a site of unity. People were vulnerable in their sharing. They spoke from the heart. They spoke truthfully, but they spoke respectfully. People laughed. They shared stories about their own struggles. They looked inside their own hearts, talked about how they were challenged, how maybe they need to grow. And I just walked away with that, being reminded of that. It might seem sometimes that the reality we take in perhaps from media or from social media or from online and that's curated and given to us through algorithms might seem perhaps more toxic and more divided than it actually is in reality in person when we as people of goodwill come together to address some of these challenges and these issues. And so I was heartened by that event and continue to live off the graces of that event. And so I just want to leave that as like a reminder for us that we might feel that we're living in very, very challenging, difficult times. And I don't want to downplay that in any way. And I want to affirm people's feelings in this. But I also just want to say too, that there are also great things happening, and the church continues to be in many ways, not perfectly by any means, but in many ways, a source of unity that God desired it to be. And that particularly in person, people are willing to do the hard work of deepening communion and working through some of the more challenging issues. So with those three stories as kind of an entree, I want to now just pivot to the second part of this talk. And really, people have oftentimes asked me, so Father Aaron, like, what do you think Jesus wants us to do in this moment? And many times when I've addressed groups in a similar fashion, this is sort of the area that I focus around, because I do believe that there are many excellent tools, and I won't be able to get into all of the research around this, but certainly I go into this more in my book, and there's other stuff online. But these aren't just like, I think, tools that are theologically grounded. They are for sure. I think they flow very much from Jesus's own life. I think, as bold as it might be to say, I think they are things that Jesus might invite us to consider in this moment. But the great part about this too is there is a lot of we might call social psychological research that suggests that these things actually work. I've seen them work in my own life. I've heard from other people who said they work as well. They're not a perfect solution by any means, but they do work, and they do, I think, give us a chance to take a deep breath and sort of regain some healthy control in our life, and sort of to act with deep agency in the particular moment that we're living in, rather than just have these outside forces continuing to act upon us and influence us in ways that are maybe making us act in ways that we're not really proud of. So here are just kind of three tools, and I'm going to juxtapose each of these tools with the kind of negative tendency that we find in a polarized culture. So one of the tendencies that I think oftentimes exist in a polarized milieu is an unhelpful tendency, which is it comes from deep in our guts, and I feel this too, so I'm not immune from this, but it's the desire to want to blame. And that blame is usually directed at, people from quote unquote the other group. And, each of us belongs to particular groups. And that's kind of part of what I explore in my book. But it's wanting to blame another group, wanting to blame a particular leader, particular politician, particular person in the church, wanting to blame a particular event that has taken place. And again, I understand that. A lot of people expressed this to me in the desire to blame. I was giving a talk at a very formal gathering, and we went to the question and answer session at the end of this formal gathering. And the woman who raised her hand, she was red, she was sweating, she was struggling, and her response to me with her hand in the air after she heard everything I talked about was, she simply said, "Father, you don't understand. It's all those people over there. They're the ones to blame." She said, "Even I want to buy one of your books for every one of those people." And I think to myself, well, that would be great to sell those books, but again, I think that's not necessarily the answer to the situation. And I think Jesus instead, rather than blame the other, really invites us to examine our own conscience. So rather than to think about, how do they need to change, to really think about, how do I need to change in this particular moment? So like, what has been my contribution to the challenge of polarization? How have I acted in ways that have deepened divisions rather than deepened communion? And then just to take another step further, which is going to be just as difficult, not just myself, but what's my group's contribution? One of the great gifts that we can offer to a polarized world is to be honest, self-critical about our own groups that we belong to. It might be my own particular subgroup in Catholicism. It might be the partisan group that I belong to. It might be like the group within my family that I better associate with. So where are we being invited to change? What has been our contribution? And there are a lot of other questions that one can think about. I think a really helpful question to do an examination is, do I know how we have arrived here? Do I know how we have arrived in 2025, 2026 in the United States? One of the things I do in the first couple chapters of my book is try to trace the last 6 decades about some of the contours that have contributed to this moment. And I think the more we can understand how we've arrived where we're at and where we actually are, I think the better we will have the freedom to respond in the ways that Jesus wants us to. Then just to think very clearly, and as honestly as possible, what are my own biases, my own leanings, my own preferences? Where did I grow up? What groups or party? What kinds of theology? What parish? What are all my preferences? And some of those can be very good, and I'm not saying they're bad, but they do bias us in a particular way, and they will mean we'll relate to other groups, perhaps that see the world differently than us in different ways as well. That might not necessarily be helpful, but just to get comfortable with our own biases. A really difficult challenge is that many times we don't have meaningful interactions with folks who see the world differently. So just to think about that, do I have many moments, some moments, a few moments in my life where I am choosing to be, or where I am the kind of minority within a particular group? Do I look for meaningful experiences to be around people who see the world differently? I've traveled around the United States a lot, and in the coastal regions are quite different, of course, than the interior. Appalachia is quite different than Washington, D.C. The South, of course, much more different than the Midwest where I came from. There are a lot of similarities, but these are different parts of the country that we're a part of. And do I have meaningful experiences with people who are from those areas? Do I seek them out? Again, how do I need to change? Maybe my behavior online. And then a big consideration. How do I need healing or reconciliation? I've heard from many people that because of the divisions that exist, they've had falling outs with some of the most important people in their life, and they've been hurt. And so reconciliation and healing is something for us to pray for and actively pursue in this particular moment. So a very practical item. This is a little shameless self-promotion. One of the things that people have said has really been helpful to do this examination of conscience is actually to go through the book that I wrote. Probably you want the one in English rather than Hungarian, but and read it a chapter at a time with 3 or 4 friends, maybe with somebody you've struggled to kind of bridge the divide. with some of the differences you have. And the great thing about it is that I can kind of become your foil. So you can sort of say, well, we don't agree with Father Aaron on this or that. But what happens is it helps people to like have a foundation on which they can talk about some very important issues and then look at these tools and sort of think reflectively in their own lives about some of the things that are going on. And I share that because people have said to me many times, Father, and please share this with others, that going through your book in small groups has actually really, really been helpful. So the second tool, after we do this examination of conscience, which is a never-ending task, obviously, it's very much a part of being Catholic, but very much needed to be thought about specifically in light of the polarized situation we're living in. The second kind of negative tendency that we see in a polarized culture, it's not all bad, of course, but is that we find ourselves like retreating into our own silos and tribes or our own fortresses. And there is a good sense in us as human beings, and there's a lot of social psychological research on this, and I touch on this in the book, that we do need groups. We do need a sense of belonging. We do need places where we can have our identity strengthened. And all of that's good. It's a part of who we are as human beings, right? But the tendency in a polarized world is that we latch on to these groups. To use the metaphor here, right, of the fortress, we build thicker walls. We don't leave the fortress. We only remain in the silo. We only associate with people from our tribe. And that can actually deepen negatively the challenge of polarization. And so I think for us specifically as Christians, founded on a deep kind of Christological reflection, I think Jesus invites us to cross over. And this sense of crossing over is looking at the missionary dynamism of what it means to be a disciple, but with a particular emphasis. I developed this in a couple of chapters in the book, so this will be moving quite quickly. But we just celebrated the feast of Christmas, right? We're in the final days, depending on how we look at the liturgical season, right? And in the incarnation is really God looking at what he created and seeing that creation had become the other in a sense. We had become at enmity with God. We had become God's enemy. Creation took the gift and, in a sense, kind of threw it away. And we as creatures have done that. And we've all know the effects of sin, right? And in any moment along the way, I think God, as the scriptures we've been reading these days says, God would have been justified to just kind of quit the project. But Christmas, the incarnation, is the revelation that God desires to not distance himself from the other, but to cross over into the other's experience in order to unite himself actually more intimately with us. And it is this movement, what I call the incarnational movement, this movement of crossing over, which we see all throughout Jesus's ministry. So we have the demoniac depicted here. The scriptures say, everybody took a different path, right? To avoid the other, to avoid the demon. Isn't that our own lives at times? In our families or in our polarized world, we take the other path to avoid the person or the situation. Jesus crosses right over into the midst of the demoniac in order to bring about a salvific moment, a moment of encounter with the other. This happens all throughout his ministry, right? So he encounters the leper, the ostracized one, the outcast of society. He walks into the gathering place of the so-called sinners, and he calls Matthew out of that moment and to follow him. And in this kind of modern depiction, Jesus sets the table and consistently he's inviting, quote unquote, sinners to the table, so much so that this is the critique that the religious leaders of his day said of him, right? Oh my gosh, he dines with sinners, right? So he crosses over or allows others to come into his midst who are different, who are other. There's the political other, the ethnic other, the religious other, the ideological other. And that's the consistent example of Jesus. So I believe this sense of crossing over is not an addendum to discipleship, but is essential to who we are. And so we have to be intentionally finding moments to first examine our conscience and then to cross over into those places where we are in the midst of the other, right? So think about our family, the uncle, cousin that we try to avoid, right? But to say, well, I think Christ has invited me actually to engage, to encounter. We all, not we all, but in many cases, we choose a parish where we feel the most at home. That's understandable. But do we ever take the opportunity to go to a parish that has a different liturgical expression than we're used to? It might have a slightly different slice of Catholic theology than we're more comfortable with, right? Do we intentionally step out of that environment, that silo, and try to engage something that's different? I was at, as just a little bit of an aside, I was at the Seek conference in Columbus, Ohio, which is started by Focus. It's a gathering of like 16,000 young adults from the ages of like 18 to 25. So I learned many things. I was reminded that I'm getting old, which is a great reminder to have in life. It's very difficult for me to relate to an 18 to 22-year-old. The Seek gathering was wonderful, amazing, a blessing. I love that they do it. But there are a lot of expressions of Catholicism in that environment that certainly they are validly Catholic, but they are not my spiritual life. They're not my spirituality. They're not what I'm used to. I grew up in rural Minnesota. It's just different. And that's okay. I need to be challenged by those moments and to kind of step out of my Glenmary silo, if you will, and have those kinds of experiences, which is a tremendous blessing. We could think about this crossing over in our cities, our towns, political issues, partisan issues. Who comes to our table? In our families, are we intentional once in a while to invite an outsider to our table? And then a big one, of course, is the media and social media that we take on. Are we letting the algorithm to control our life, or are we choosing to engage a diversity of resources to have a more well-rounded perspective? One example I go into my book that I can't get into in much detail here is the early example of St. Francis of Assisi. During his time, the Crusades were going on, and there was this kind of like great fortress mentality. Uh, Christians in their fortress, Muslims in their fortress, and they were going to battle, and it was terrible, and people were losing their lives. And Francis kind of asked that question, right? Isn't there another way? And more could be said about the story, but what did Francis do? He went into the battle lines, crossed over in his humble robe, not to kill the Muslim, not to kill the Sultan, but actually to encounter the Sultan, to engage the Sultan, to dialogue with the Sultan. So just to actually cross into the midst of the other. And most of the stories about that say that both Francis and the Sultan walked away wiser people because of that engagement. So to kind of put on this different mentality, this different imagination. And then the last kind of tool that I would recommend, again, among others that could be mentioned. So we have the examination of conscience, the sense of crossing over. Then when we get into the midst of the other, it can create a lot of anxiety, and I understand that. We can become rigid. There's a tendency in polarized culture for overconfidence. There's a great sense of uncertainty in the world we're living in. Polarized culture amplifies that uncertainty. So we want to hold on to our beliefs, hold on to our ideologies, hold on to our partisan identity, hold on to the piece of Catholicism that's worked for us. And again, it's not always bad, okay? It's just that too much rigidity, too much overconfidence can become problematic in many different ways. And I think Jesus invites us in the face of rigidity or overconfidence to really try to become more curious. And this is a great challenge for me as well, and not an easy thing to do. But Jesus did it all the time. Even though he was the Son of God and had, divine foreknowledge, divine insight, he oftentimes led with questions. Rather than presuming upon the other, he would say, as he's doing here, to the crippled man next to the pool of Bethesda, what do you want? Do you want to be healed? What do you want from me? Who do you say that I am? All these questions Jesus led. And so he leads from a kind of curiosity or kind of holy curiosity. And so the invitation for us, and there's a lot written on this, and I write about this a lot in my own book, is to really develop a lifestyle of curiosity. And really at the heart of that is to ask myself the question, am I a person who can listen? Would my spouse say that I'm a person who can listen? I'm often struck by this for myself because I don't do it well sometimes, but and also in some of the situations I'm in as a leader, are we even listening to what's being said here? Do we hear? Can I learn? Am I open to learn? Do I want to learn? Is there a certain intellectual humility about me which opens up this lifestyle of curiosity? And then to have a good question in the back of our mind, right? So we hit these moments where we're uncomfortable. We're at the table with our uncle, our nephew, our brother or sister. They say something that kind of drives us a little bit nuts. Just, can you help me understand? But then to the lifestyle is that I actually really believe the question, right? Because people can see our in these moments where we're maybe disingenuous, but can you help me understand? Or another question which moves us slightly away from the tense issue, but so okay, that's what you believe. How did you come to that belief? And usually when we begin to share stories, begin to see the person at a deeper level, and they usually open up and can open up because now we're not rigidly on the issue, but we're thinking about who we are as human beings. A great question to wrestle with in moments in a polarized world is, what am I missing? What am I missing in this moment? What do I not see? What do I not understand? And then the final thing here is really just to say, is really just to say, maybe we just see things differently in this moment. And maybe we just need to step away from it at this time and allow the Holy Spirit and time and space to work in our hearts. We don't have to bring to completion that conversation. We don't have to see eye to eye in that moment. That doesn't have to be the goal. But instead, just simply to say, you know what? We see things differently. I'm willing to think about this more and to step away. This is all part of this kind of lifestyle of curiosity. Some very practical applications. I think we need to get curious about the liturgy. Lots of talk about the liturgy going on. If you talk to young people, I was at the C conference I mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the traditional Latin Mass. A lot of young people get excited about that. And this is not my experience as a priest or coming through the seminary. But again, can I get curious? Can we get curious about what's going on in the church today on these issues? I think we have so much to offer as a church around this theme of immigration, but can we get curious about it together? Can we listen to the various perspectives, even if we disagree with them? Can we try to find wisdom and truth in the moment? I do think we need to revisit our media, and I try to do this myself. If we read stories, if we read commentary, we watch videos, we listen to podcasts, and the people are overly confident in their perspective, we might find a source where instead people are wrestling with the complexity of life. Life is complex. And our sources of media, I think, should at least in some ways recognize that complexity, engage the complexity, curiously work with people who see the world differently. That exposes us to different perspectives, and then we can form our own way of thinking, hopefully guided by our really rich tradition in the church. And then just a personal question, where do I need to get more curious, or with whom perhaps do I need to get more curious? And just pointing us then kind of in the last direction here, a great inspiration for me is somebody like St. Thomas Aquinas. And I write about him in the book again as an example of this holy curiosity. During Aquinas' time, everybody was, philosophically, they were Platonists or Neoplatonists. They used the philosophy of Plato. And there was a kind of overconfidence and rigidity within the academy actually at that time. And it seems kind of maybe as a foolish thing for us, in living in 2026. But Thomas saw the work of Aristotle, and he was willing to be curious about the work of Aristotle brought to him through Jewish and Muslim interpreters. And he risked being rejected by those other thinkers around him because he was willing to be curious and to say, where is truth, beauty, and goodness in this other thinker, in this other source, in these other traditions, in places where I can be enhanced in my own thinking, and then perhaps the church and the tradition can be enhanced. And so Thomas is a great example there because the church would never be the same because of his holy curiosity, his willingness to engage the other and ask the question, and bringing in Aristotle's work into the Catholic tradition certainly purifying it and working with it and challenging the system itself. But our own theology, our own self-understanding of Catholicism today would not be the same without what Thomas did and having that great sense of curiosity. So I pray for his intercession constantly in my own life as I try to navigate this polarized setting. So as we close here, a couple questions that you might think about, you might want to comment on, or you might have for me. But what part of this presentation was meaningful to you? What part has challenged you? What maybe did you not agree with, or do you need to hear more about? And then what questions do you have for me? And so with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Father Aaron. That is just such a powerful presentation and a reminder that, it kind of starts with us to end polarization. The first question we do have is, what's the source of that lovely contemporary Last Supper picture that you showed?
That's a great question, and I don't know. I pulled that somewhere from the internet, and I will do my best to do some research on that and get that to you. So the person who did it can get due credit. So thanks for the question.
Perfect. Thank you.
I hope I'm not blanching too much.
And I'm just going to go back to your book for a minute, because one of the things you do talk about in the book too is the danger of using war terminology for our political issues. Would you mind just expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is a significant part of the book, something that I did not refer to as much in this presentation. And the short of it would be to say metaphors, images, symbols are really powerful in our lives, and they can affect us, and they do affect us in very, very important ways. And so I think part of our life is like unpacking the metaphors which influence and how we see the world. And one of the things that I try to argue in the book, and I use quite a bit of data to try to show it, is that really over the last 40 or 50 years, uh, in the political sphere, so the partisan political sphere to begin, there was the utilization of the war metaphor to see one's political um, uh, colleague or whatever, or the political person across the aisle as an enemy, and that we were at war with that person, and that we needed to destroy them at all costs. And that war imagery was actually slowly brought into the church. And I began to see in different instances, and I try to document that in the book, that we were been utilizing the war imagery for our understanding of discipleship, such that following Jesus actually means going to war against other people who see the world differently. And I use so many examples of Jesus to try to show that the metaphors that Jesus puts forth to us as believers are just so different than the very clear, you are my enemy and I need to destroy you image that oftentimes comes with war. When we're at war, the stakes are high. It's life and death. And Jesus knows the stakes are high for us, but again, he uses different images. And so he uses things like the image of the good shepherd. So what does the Christian do? Like if somebody goes astray ideologically, politically, culturally, we don't condemn them and want to kill them as an enemy. We actually are supposed to leave our own group and go and care for them and place them on our shoulders, such that in a sense we take on their own stench in a way. Again, these are images, so as to sort of rescue that one. Another great image is, of course, of the prodigal son. So somebody goes astray, we don't give up on them, we don't condemn them, we don't want to own them, we don't want to humiliate them, anything like that. In fact, we're like the father that sees the son returning, and we run out to greet the son in order to embrace the prodigal son. So those are just a couple images. There's so much more that could be said, but I just invite us to think, what's the image I have as a disciple? So I look at the world around me, I'm going to engage. Am I hostile to that world? Am I suspicious of that world? Or am I like Christ in that world? And it's not always easy to say exactly what Christ wants us to do in every moment. So I talk about prudence in my book. We have to be prudent because we can't just say you need to do X, you need to do Y, you need to do Z. It's much more complicated than that. But just to sort of look at the metaphors that influence our lives and think about that.
And that actually segues really well into the next question. So Karen says, Father, thank you so much for the challenging presentation. Challenging because it asks me to do more. How can we bring these tools to issues where we feel strongly that the other tribe is going against the gospel or engaged in immoral dehumanization, according to my views, of course?
So I guess maybe the easiest way, not the easiest way, but one way that's helped me think about this question in my own ministry and life is, um, now maybe I have a more colored history than other people, but I think about myself when I was in college, and I was raised Catholic, so I don't have this big conversion experience story, but certainly I know that like the kind of Catholicism that I was living when I was in college was probably not something that we should be excited about and hold up as a great example. And that was both like in actions, but also like what I thought, and just sometimes just out of complete ignorance. And so one could say that in that moment I was living against the gospel. I didn't know the gospel. I wasn't doing well with the gospel. But what was the thing that helped me change? The thing that helped me change was one or two or three friends or mentors, people who said, yeah, like Father Aaron, no, I wasn't Father Aaron then. Aaron, he's a mess. But they were willing to love me. They were willing to enter into my experience. They were willing to be really patient when I would probably say things that were ridiculous. They were willing to seek prudence and wisdom and trust the Holy Spirit that time helps. And they hung with me. So they journeyed, they accompanied me, they hung with me. And it was because of that very fine dance, if you will, that fine engagement, that I'm the priest that I am today. There's just simply no other way. So I'd say think about our own mentors, think about our own selves. When have we not got it? What has worked for us? I don't, maybe it's the case that for some people, like disengagement and like trying to own the other person, or being defeated in a debate has helped some people let grow. But I think probably more people would say, well, and I think the example of Jesus is the engagement, the accompaniment, um, the curiosity, and the journeying with. So that's what I'd say, to be around the groups and the people that think differently. Just live your faith as joyfully and vibrantly as you can. Listen, be curious. Maybe they don't know exactly why they believe the things that they do. Maybe they hold a position that's very contrary to the church's teaching. Maybe they've never even thought about it. Maybe maybe they don't know why they hold that view. And you might be the first person through your relationship with them to be able to ask them a question that reveals to them the path that they need to go on in order to find, more deeply the wisdom and truth of God. So thank you. That's a great question. It's a challenge for sure.
Thank you for that too. And I always say we need to ask the question, and then what? So you have this policy that does this, and then what happens to the people impacted by that policy? But
Yeah.
David asked, do you have any suggestions on how to do an in-person interfaith community conversation with religious right and Muslims, Jewish, Buddhist, Catholic, and other Christian denominations?
Well, so I guess I'm not quite sure, like what kind of an in-person event that they would desire to have. Is it just like kind of generally around this issue, do you think, Gene, or?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. David, if you want to unmute and provide some more information, we'd be happy to have you do that.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Father. Yeah, I attended recently a conversation called the Beloved Community here that was put on as a Christian group, and it was kind of a panel of people from different faiths speaking on common challenges they found in the community. And I thought it was really interesting, except for they didn't have anybody who was on the very far conservative side of some issues and comments. And so it left me with the feeling that we really need to engage in talking with some of the folks who have a very kind of different view, and to understand their viewpoint and really kind of start to engage with them. And so we were thinking about, how would we do that? How would we bring a group from, say, a very conservative focused church that's believing things that are much more different than maybe some of the Catholic social teaching ideas that we embrace, to say, hey, let's talk about some ideas and how would you do this? Bring them all in, bring 10 people from their church or bring 15 of their leaders from the churches and then do it. But just kind of practical tips if you've ever done any of these interfaith kind of conversations, and you could kind of bring a set of questions that might, help us to talk about, well, tell me more about that. I want to hear more about this.
So that's an excellent question, and I think you're highlighting a challenge that exists. It's not always easy to get people to come to the table that we might actually want to hear from, and so one of the groups, I know you're going to be doing something with Braver Angels soon. So one of the groups that really inspires me is Braver Angels, and what they do is they say, like, in the very beginning stages of the planning for anything that they try to hold, they're focused more on the civic reality of the United States and on the partisan reality of the US. But for anything that they're going to do, the planning committee itself has to have equal numbers red and blue. So equal numbers conservative and progressive, Republican or Democrat. And so I'd say the trick or the key or the important element is to really to find somebody of that persuasion who would be willing to, like, actually be part of the planning process. Because they're going to have the credibility, they're going to have the connections, the resources. They're going to know how to actually frame the issue to make it worthwhile. And so there is a matter of kind of language around some of these things. So the language of bridge building is oftentimes understood to be a little bit more of a left kind of progressive, kind of like, I don't know, something to be engaged in, for a lack of better words. And so I've my experience working with conservatives is that they don't tend to, like, actually really want to use that language. But they're much more comfortable, like, around using words like truth seeking or even debating. So I think debating is another way to frame it. So the whole thing is we're like using different language that doesn't necessarily speak to one group or the other. So that'd be the biggest thing for me to say, that just in the time we have, is to try to find somebody to put on the planning committee who was interested in this. And then that person can really, I think, help shape the conversation for you. That would be the first thing to think about.
Great suggestion. And we've got one final question here. The choice to silo is something that resonates with me and drives me crazy. But I understand the paradoxical need to commune with fellow Catholics, like activities that are programmed within the church walls. However, I find that the church becomes so churchy that that's all they do. All their socialization and recreation becomes exclusively within the church and no engagement with the world. Is it up to the pastor of the church to lead, get us out? The church means the called out ones, after all.
Yeah, so I laugh while that question was being read, because, so I'm a missionary who desires to cross over into environments where I'm like the minority. But then I got elected to our leadership council. So my whole life is lived around Catholics. Like, I can't get away from Catholics. Like, I mean, I love Catholics, but it's just the nature of my reality right now. And that's great. I mean, but I understand exactly what's being said. So it can become a kind of club experience, right? A country club experience. And I love Catholicism. I mean, obviously, like, it's just great. But I think I think you're hearing what I'm saying. I think it's I would hope that it's all of our by baptism, it's all of our calling to live this sense of crossing over. I didn't say just once a month, find a group, a club, a setting that's not Catholic, and where you're completely out of your element, and begin there. And that's just a really great way to do it. Join a chess club, go to yeah, find a hobby that pulls you out of that environment. Go to the atheist gathering in your city if you're a brave person, and just say, I'm just here to learn. um so one thing out of a month, the 29 days you can be with your Catholic group, and then one day to do this, and it actually really changes us. And I find that, with prudence, if my faith is strong enough, if my identity is grounded enough in Christ, this is a good thing for me. And that's where prudence comes in. If I'm not grounded enough, I have to be real careful. Maybe I don't have to do it by myself. Maybe I do it with a group of people that, sort of that to help me along. But it can be just such a good thing, because people outside of our group ask questions we've never thought of. They challenge us. They help us, especially the ones that are really good natured. and are people that want to pursue wisdom, find those other wisdom figures, no matter what group or ideology that they might be a part of. So that's a great question, and thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Father. And you can come down to Olympia starting next Monday and join us with talking with legislators. You learn a whole lot and you have a whole lot of opportunities to put this into practice.
Oh, that's
Well,
cool.
again, thank you, Father, for being with us today. I can't thank you enough for joining us and for inspiring us to act consistently with our faith and to try and build a more just and peaceful world. And many thanks to all of you for attending us today. For those of you in Washington State, we are following up this webinar with a live workshop to help us expand on what we've learned today. That event takes place March 21st from 9 to 12. It is with Braver Angels, and it's at the Archbishop Brunette Retreat Center in Federal Way. Those of you who are not in Washington State, you are welcome to come and join us at that event as well. But please know it is a free event, but you do need to register, and you can do that by going to our website, wcatholics.org, and sign up today. We also hope you'll sign up for our Catholic Advocacy Network at wcatholics.org, and that way you can stay up to date with what we are doing and advocating during the 2026 legislative session, which does begin on January 12th and will give us many opportunities to practice getting out of our silos and not assuming the worst of the people that we are talking to. So again, thank you everyone and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you so much.